Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Smoke and Mirrors. Nolan Voss had always been underestimated. At 38, with his wiry build and quiet demeanor, people tended to mistake his calculation for weakness. He remembered the first time he'd met Veronica Harding at that gallery opening in Boston 5 years ago. She called him refreshingly understated compared to the hedge fund managers competing for her attention. What he'd initially taken as appreciation for his subtlety, he later recognized as dismissal. The house on Oakwood Drive was uncomfortably quiet as Nolan pretended to examine quarterly projections for his security consultation firm. In reality, he was studying his wife's expressions as she tapped away at her phone, a half-smile playing on her lips. Their marriage had been cooling for months, but it was the little things that convinced him something more sinister was brewing. Hushed phone conversations that abruptly ended when he entered rooms, unexplained withdrawals from their joint account, and that peculiar insurance policy she'd insisted they take out 3 months ago. "The plumber's coming tomorrow about that gas smell in the basement," Veronica announced, not bothering to look up from her phone. "Try to be out of the house. You know how you get with these service people, all suspicious and hovering." "Can't," Nolan replied. "I've got the Henderson proposal to finish. Deadline's tomorrow." A lie. The proposal had been submitted last week. Veronica's fingers paused over her phone screen. "Seriously? You can't give me one afternoon without your paranoia?" "It's not paranoia when they've screwed us over before. Remember the electrician who fixed our wiring and nearly burned the house down?" Another fabrication. There had never been an electrician. She sighed dramatically. "Fine. Do what you want. Just stay out of his way." Nolan watched as she retreated upstairs, her posture stiff with irritation. He waited until he heard the shower running before slipping into her home office. The room was immaculate, too immaculate. Veronica had never been organized. He methodically searched through her desk drawers, careful to leave everything exactly as he found it. In the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of old magazines, he discovered a burner phone. The text messages confirmed what he'd suspected for weeks. Veronica was having an affair. But what chilled him was the conversation from 3 days ago. "Insurance is set. Just need to make it look accidental. Gas leak is cleanest. You sure he won't suspect? Nolan? Please." The man's completely oblivious. "He trusts me completely." Nolan replaced everything exactly as he'd found it, his mind racing but his hands steady. He'd built his reputation on crisis management and threat assessment. Now he would need every bit of that expertise to survive his own marriage. When Veronica emerged from the shower, Nolan was back on the couch, spreadsheets spread before him, his face a perfect mask of concentration. "I'm going to sleep," she announced. "Don't stay up too late. Just finishing this section," he murmured without looking up. As her footsteps receded upstairs, Nolan opened his laptop and began researching the plumbing company scheduled for tomorrow's appointment. Dominic Rafferty owned Rafferty Plumbing and Heating. Former military. 2 prior arrests for assault. Charges dropped. License legitimate, but several customer complaints buried in public records. Nolan's phone buzzed with a text from his brother Theo. "Still on for fishing this weekend?" He replied, "Change of plans. Need to talk. Emergency." The pieces were falling into place. Tomorrow he would face the man his wife had hired to kill him. But Nolan Voss had never been one to walk into a trap unprepared. Chapter 2. The Unassuming Target. Nolan met his brother Theo at a diner 15 miles outside of town at 6 a.m. Despite their physical similarities, both with the same sharp features and storm gray eyes, Theo had always been the more imposing presence. A former Marine turned private security specialist, Theo's hulking frame dwarfed the booth they occupied. "You look like shit," Theo observed, sliding a coffee across the table. "Veronica is trying to kill me," Nolan replied without preamble. To his credit, Theo didn't laugh or dismiss him. Instead, he set down his mug and asked, "Evidence?" Nolan showed him photos he'd taken of the text messages, the insurance policy, the withdrawals. He explained about the plumber scheduled for later that day. "You need to call the cops," Theo said firmly. And tell them what? That I illegally access my wife's burner phone? That I have suspicions about a plumber who hasn't done anything yet? Nolan shook his head. I need concrete proof. I need to catch them in the act. That's how people end up dead and all. I'm not walking into this blind. Nolan slid a USB drive across the table. Everything I've found is backed up here. If something happens to me, it goes straight to Detective Laurel Mendez. Remember her from the Parkman case last year? She owes me a favor. Theo pocketed the drive reluctantly. What's your plan? I'm going to let them think they're succeeding. Nolan's voice was cold, detached. I'll pretend to nap on the couch when the plumber arrives. Record everything. Then slip out when they're distracted. And then what? Then I dismantle their lives piece by piece. The smile that crossed Nolan's face made even Theo uncomfortable. Nobody betrays me and walks away untouched. Across town, Veronica Voss was meeting Dominic Rafferty at a roadside motel. At 42, Dominic had the weathered good looks of someone who'd lived hard but aged well. The tattoos covering his forearms told stories of military service and prison stints he rarely discussed. I don't like this, he said, pacing the cramped room. Murder's a whole different level. Veronica reclined on the bed, her tailored business attire incongruous against the dingy bedspread. It's not murder. It's solving a problem. She twisted the wedding band on her finger. Nolan's company is about to land a government contract worth millions. With the prenup gone after 5 years of marriage and that insurance policy, we'd have everything we need to disappear. And if something goes wrong, nothing will go wrong if you follow the plan. Gas leaks happen in old houses like ours all the time. She rose and pressed herself against him. One day of discomfort for a lifetime of freedom. Isn't that worth it? What neither of them knew was that Wesley Burke, Nolan's closest friend and business partner, was sitting in a parked car across the street, documenting their meeting with a telephoto lens. The same Wesley who had introduced Nolan and Veronica at the gallery 5 years ago, consumed by guilt over bringing this woman into his friend's life. Back at home, Nolan was preparing. He placed nearly invisible motion sensors at key points throughout the house. He installed microscopic audio recorders in the living room and basement. He prepared an overnight bag and stashed it in a compartment beneath the back porch. Then he settled in to wait for the trap to spring. Chapter 3. The Sprung Trap. At precisely 1:15 p.m., the doorbell rang. Nolan watched from the upstairs window as Dominic Rafferty climbed out of a white van emblazoned with Rafferty Plumbing and Heating. He looked exactly like his license photo, tall, muscular, with a close-cropped beard and the confident posture of someone used to physical confrontation. Veronica answered the door, her voice carrying up the stairs. Mr. Rafferty, thank you for coming on such short notice. Happy to help, Mrs. Voss. Where's this gas smell you mentioned? Basement. But first, let me check if my husband is still working. He can be difficult with service people. Nolan quickly moved to the master bedroom, mussed the sheets, then made his way downstairs to the living room couch. He arranged himself in a convincing sleeping position, eyes nearly closed but allowing a sliver of vision. His phone was recording in his pocket. Veronica appeared in the doorway, studied him for a moment, then returned to the foyer where Rafferty waited. He's asleep on the couch, she said, voice lowered. Perfect timing. Follow me. As they descended to the basement, Nolan silently rose and positioned himself near the basement door, listening. The gas line is over here, Veronica was saying. I've already loosened the connection like you showed me, but I need you to make it look professional. Something that would pass inspection after they find him. And you're sure he won't wake up? Rafferty's voice echoed off the basement walls. I crushed a sleeping pill into his lunch. He'll be out for hours. Nolan smiled grimly. He'd noticed the bitter aftertaste in his sandwich and had quietly disposed of most of it after taking a few bites for show. Once you're done, Veronica continued, we leave separately. I'll go shopping, establish an alibi. When I come home, I'll find him unresponsive from the gas and call 911. By then it'll be too late. My payment, half now, half when the insurance pays out. $100,000 each installment. And if something goes wrong, nothing will go wrong if you do your job right. Her voice hardened. Don't worry about the noise. My husband's useless, sleeps all day. Just make sure that gas leak looks like an accident after you leave. Nolan had heard enough. He silently slipped to the back door, retrieving his pre-packed bag from beneath the porch. As he made his way across the backyard to the gate, he texted Theo, plan in motion. Meet at location B. He then called Detective Laurel Mendez directly. Boss, been a while. Her voice was guarded, but professional. I need your help, Laurel. My wife is trying to kill me. 40 minutes later, Nolan watched from Theo's car as police cruisers surrounded his house. He provided Detective Mendez with the recordings, the insurance documents, and the text messages Wesley had forwarded from his surveillance. They waited until Veronica emerged from the basement with Rafferty, both looking satisfied with their work. The moment the police announced themselves, the color drained from her face. Nolan stepped out of the car and approached as officers handcuffed both Veronica and Dominic. What's happening? Veronica demanded, her voice pitched high with feigned confusion. Nolan, thank God you're all right. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. Detective Mendez cut her off. Mrs. Voss, we have you on audio conspiring to murder your husband via gas leak. We've also secured the tampered gas line as evidence. That's absurd. I would never. She spotted Nolan walking toward them and forced tears to her eyes. Nolan, tell them. Tell them I would never hurt you. Nolan stood before her, his expression calm as he delivered the lines he'd rehearsed. My mother-in-law was making me a lunch, but then... He paused, watching recognition flash in Veronica's eyes. I heard you planning my murder with your lover. Her fake tears stopped instantly when they read her rights. As the officers led her toward the squad car, she hissed at Nolan, this isn't over. Actually, he replied softly, it's just beginning. Chapter 4. The Depths of Betrayal. The arraignment was a media circus. Nolan sat in the back of the courtroom, watching as Veronica and Dominic were formally charged with conspiracy to commit murder. His mother-in-law, Pauline Harding, sat across the aisle, her face a mask of disbelief and rage. You set her up, Pauline spat as they exited the courtroom. Veronica would never do this. The evidence speaks for itself, Nolan replied evenly. I suggest you direct your energy toward finding her a good attorney. What Nolan didn't reveal was how deep his investigation had already gone. In the weeks since the arrests, he'd hired a team of private investigators to dig into both Veronica's and Dominic's pasts. What they uncovered was more complex than a simple affair. Back at the temporary apartment he'd rented, Nolan spread the files across the dining table as Wesley and Theo looked on. Veronica and Dominic knew each other before we met, Nolan explained, pointing to old photographs. They grew up in the same town in Pennsylvania. There are police reports of them together as teenagers. He took an assault charge for her when they were 19. So their reconnection wasn't coincidence, Wesley mused. Not even close. Nolan pulled out financial records. 3 weeks after our wedding, she started siphoning small amounts from our accounts into a shell company. The real kicker? My security company landing that government contract wasn't luck either. Dominic's cousin works in the procurement office. Theo whistled low. This was a long con. 5 years. Nolan's voice was hollow. 5 years of my life with someone who was planning my death from the beginning. What's your next move? Wesley asked. Nolan gathered the files methodically. Veronica's being represented by Sullivan Pierce, top defense attorney in the state. Somehow she's affording his $800 per hour fees despite her accounts being frozen. Someone's bankrolling her, Theo concluded. Exactly. And I'm going to find out who. Nolan's phone chimed with a notification. That's our cue. Tara Lowell just arrived at Lakeview Restaurant. Tara had been Veronica's closest friend and confidant for years. Nolan had always found her coldly calculating beneath her bubbly exterior. As he suspected, she was now serving as the conduit between Veronica and whoever was funding her defense. Nolan met her alone, presenting the carefully crafted image of a broken man seeking answers. I just need to understand why, he said, his voice deliberately unsteady as they sat at a corner table. 5 years together. Was any of it real? Tara studied him, sympathy and calculation warring in her expression. Veronica loved you in her way, Nolan. But some people aren't built for conventional happiness. Did she ever talk about leaving me? Before all this? She mentioned feeling trapped sometimes. Tara sipped her wine, choosing her words carefully. The prenup was restrictive. So this was about money? Nolan pressed, letting his voice crack slightly. Isn't it always? Tara's smile didn't reach her eyes. Look, Veronica made mistakes, serious ones. But she's still my friend. I'm standing by her. Even if she murdered me, would you have attended my funeral, Tara? She set down her glass. I should go. As she gathered her purse, Nolan reached for her hand. I'm sorry. That was unfair. I'm just lost. If you speak to her, tell her I'm willing to talk. About a settlement, about dropping charges, anything to understand why. The desperation in his voice was perfectly calibrated, and he saw Tara's moment of calculation. She was weighing whether he could be manipulated. I'll let her know, she finally said. What Tara didn't notice was the microscopic tracker Nolan had transferred to her purse when he'd reached for her hand. As he watched her drive away, Wesley's voice came through his earpiece from the surveillance van. She bought it. Heading east on Parker Street now. Stay with her, Nolan instructed, and call Laurel. I want everything legally admissible. Within 3 hours, they had their answer. Tara led them straight to Gregory Harding, Veronica's uncle and Pauline's brother. The wealthy real estate developer had always despised Nolan, considering him beneath his niece. Now, they had proof he was funding Veronica's defense and coordinating her strategy from outside. It's bigger than we thought, Detective Mendez told Nolan later that evening. Gregory Harding's financials are intertwined with half a dozen shell companies similar to the one Veronica was feeding. We're looking at a potential money laundering operation spanning years. Using my marriage as cover, Nolan concluded. Potentially, Laurel hesitated. We need more evidence to bring charges against Gregory. Right now, paying for his niece's attorney isn't illegal. What do you need? Access to his financial records, communications with Veronica prior to her arrest, anything linking him to the murder plot. Nolan's expression hardened. Give me 2 days. Chapter 5. The Architect's Design. Gregory Harding's estate sprawled across 5 acres of prime Massachusetts coastline. The mansion, with its perfectly manicured grounds and private beach access, screamed old money and privilege. Precisely the image Gregory had cultivated despite having built his fortune through methods that rarely withstood scrutiny. Nolan had never been invited inside during his marriage to Veronica. Now, he stood in Gregory's wood-paneled study under very different circumstances. You have remarkable nerve showing up here, Gregory said, not bothering to rise from behind his massive desk. At 62, he maintained the fitness of a man 20 years younger, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his tailored suit immaculate. I thought it was time we spoke directly, Nolan replied. No intermediaries. About why you orchestrated a 5-year con ending with my murder. Gregory's laugh was dismissive. Your paranoia is embarrassing, Nolan. Veronica made a terrible mistake getting involved with that plumber, but suggesting I orchestrated anything is absurd. Then explain why your name appears on the incorporation documents for Meridian Holdings. The shell company Veronica was feeding with my money since week 3 of our marriage. The flicker in Gregory's eyes was almost imperceptible. I have investments in dozens of companies. My financial advisors handle the details. And I suppose they also handled the 7 phone calls between you and Dominic Rafferty in the week before he was scheduled to kill me. This time, Gregory couldn't hide his surprise. You're bluffing. Nolan placed a folder on the desk. Phone records don't lie. Neither do the offshore accounts you've been using to move money between your development projects and certain government officials. The FBI finds that kind of thing fascinating. What do you want? Gregory's voice had lost its condescending edge. I want to know why. Was I just a convenient path to my company's government contracts? Or was there something personal? Gregory stood slowly, pouring himself a whiskey without offering one to Nolan. Your security firm was a bonus, not the objective. The reality is much simpler. You were never going to be family. Veronica needed someone pliant, someone who would adore her enough to miss the warning signs. You fit the profile. And the murder plot, an unfortunate escalation. The original plan was divorce after accessing your company's government contracts. Veronica grew impatient. With your encouragement, Gregory shrugged. Time is money, and she always was impressionable. Nolan nodded slowly, processing the cold calculation of it all. You should know I recorded this entire conversation and obtained access to this meeting legally, with your secretary's documented permission. For the first time, genuine alarm crossed Gregory's features. You're wearing a wire? Welcome to the 21st century, Gregory. Everything's digital now. Nolan gestured to the innocent-looking pen in his breast pocket. Detective Mendez sends her regards. She'll be arriving with a warrant shortly. As if on cue, sirens became audible in the distance. Gregory's face contorted with rage. You think this changes anything? People like me don't go to prison, Nolan. We own the system you're trying to use against me. Perhaps. Nolan moved toward the door. But I've learned it's not about the system. It's about leverage. And right now, I have all of it. Within an hour, Gregory Harding was being escorted from his mansion in handcuffs, charged with conspiracy to commit murder, money laundering, and wire fraud. The case against Veronica and Dominic strengthened exponentially with Gregory's involvement documented. That evening, Nolan sat alone in his temporary apartment, staring at the wedding photo he still hadn't discarded. 5 years of his life dedicated to a woman who had never loved him, orchestrated by a man who had seen him as nothing more than a stepping stone. His phone rang, Theo checking in. They're all in custody, Nolan said flatly. Gregory, Veronica, Dominic, even Tara for accessory after the fact. That should feel like a win, Theo observed when Nolan didn't continue. It's not enough. What more could you want? They're facing serious prison time. Nolan set down the photo. They took 5 years of my life, Theo. They invaded my home, my business, my bed, all while planning my death. Prison isn't enough. Nolan, Theo's voice carried a warning. You've won. Don't cross lines you can't uncross. But Nolan had already begun formulating the next phase of his plan. Legal justice would never be sufficient for what they had done. True retribution required something more personalized. I'll call you tomorrow, he said, ending the call before Theo could argue further. He opened his laptop and began composing emails to specific contacts, people whose services fell into murky ethical and legal territories. People who could help him ensure that even if his betrayers eventually walked free, they would find nothing of their previous lives remaining. Chapter 6. The Price of Blood. The trial date was set for March, 4 months away. In the interim, Nolan methodically reclaimed control of his life while setting the stage for his comprehensive retribution. His first target was Gregory Harding's empire. Through Wesley's connections in financial journalism, Nolan arranged for a thorough expose of Gregory's business practices to be published in the Wall Street Journal. The article detailed questionable land acquisitions, environmental violations, and testimonies from former employees about coercive practices. While none of these allegations alone would destroy Gregory, they created sufficient smoke to prompt multiple regulatory investigations. Within weeks, Gregory's investors began pulling out. Partners distanced themselves. The Harding name, once synonymous with prestige in Massachusetts real estate, became toxic. Pauline Harding confronted Nolan outside the courthouse after a preliminary hearing. You've destroyed my brother's reputation based on lies, she hissed. I've done nothing but ensure the truth reaches the public, Nolan replied calmly. The destruction is entirely self-inflicted. This vendetta won't bring you peace, Nolan. Peace was never my objective, Pauline. For Dominic Rafferty, Nolan's approach was more direct. Using his security firm's connections with military contractors, he ensured that every detail of Dominic's dishonorable discharge, information previously sealed, became widely available. The reason for that discharge, selling military equipment on the black market, was particularly damning. Additionally, Nolan anonymously funded the legal representation of 3 women who had previously attempted to press assault charges against Dominic. With proper resources and support, their cases gained traction, adding to the mounting legal troubles facing Veronica's accomplice. But it was for Veronica herself that Nolan reserved his most calculated response. Rather than attacking her directly, he systematically dismantled the world she hoped to return to if she ever escaped conviction. He sold their house, donating most of the furniture to veterans organizations. He dissolved their joint investments, using his half to establish a foundation supporting victims of domestic violence. He even adopted the cat she'd insisted on but rarely cared for, giving it to an elderly neighbor who showered it with affection. Most significantly, he gathered every photograph, letter, and memento from their 5 years together and held a ceremonial burning, inviting close friends to witness his symbolic rebirth. The event was covered by local media, positioning Nolan as a sympathetic figure taking healthy steps toward recovery, further isolating Veronica in public perception. "You're becoming obsessed," Theo warned over dinner 6 weeks into Nolan's campaign. "This isn't healing, it's festering." "I'm perfectly healthy," Nolan insisted, methodically cutting his steak. "I'm exercising daily, sleeping well, and my company is thriving. The government contract came through despite Gregory's attempts to sabotage it. That's not what I mean, and you know it." Theo leaned forward. "You're channeling every ounce of energy into destroying them. What happens when there's nothing left to destroy? Then I'll know it's finished. And then what? You build a life on the ashes of revenge." Nolan set down his utensils. "They stole 5 years from me, Theo. 5 years of building a life with someone who was plotting my death. What would you have me do? Forgive and forget? No, but there's a difference between justice and obsession. One heals, the other consumes." The conversation was interrupted by Nolan's phone. "Detective Mendez, Veronica's requesting a meeting," she said without preamble. "Says she has information you'd want to hear before the trial." "What kind of information?" "She wouldn't say. Insists on speaking with you directly. No attorneys present." Nolan considered this. "When?" "Tomorrow. Supervised visit at the detention center." After ending the call, he looked at Theo. "Veronica wants to meet." "It's a manipulation," Theo said immediately. "She knows the case against her is solid. She's looking for any angle to improve her situation. Precisely why I'm going. I want to see what she thinks she can use against me now." The following afternoon, Nolan sat across from Veronica in the detention center's visitation room. 3 months of incarceration had dulled her normally immaculate appearance. Her blonde hair lacked its usual luster, and without makeup, the fine lines around her eyes were more pronounced. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice softer than he remembered. "Detective Mendez said you have information for me. Always straight to business." A ghost of her former smile appeared. "That's what I initially found attractive about you. No games, no pretense. Unlike your approach to our entire relationship." She accepted the barb with a slight nod. "I deserve that. But what I have to tell you isn't about us. It's about Gregory. I'm familiar with your uncle's criminal enterprises. Not all of them." She leaned forward. The money laundering wasn't just about cleaning cash from real estate deals. He was moving funds for the Brennan family. The Brennans were notorious in Boston's organized crime hierarchy, deeply entrenched but slippery enough to avoid major convictions. Gregory kept records, she continued. Insurance, he called it. Names, dates, amounts. If something happens to him in prison. Stop. Nolan held up his hand. If this is an attempt to trade information for leniency, take it to the prosecutor. This isn't about leniency. It's about survival. Her composure cracked slightly. The Brennans know Gregory has documentation. They've already reached out through channels, making it clear nobody connected to him is safe. That includes me and you. Me? I've never had any connection to Gregory's operations. You think that matters to people like the Brennans? You're the one who exposed Gregory. In their world, that makes you responsible for any threat to their organization. Nolan studied her, searching for the manipulation. Why warn me? Because despite everything, I never wanted you dead, Nolan. That was Gregory's escalation and Dominic's eagerness. I just wanted. She trailed off. My money. My company's contracts. Everything but me. She didn't deny it. The records are in a safety deposit box at First Maritime Bank. Box 2317. Gregory gave me the key when I agreed to marry you. It's in a hollow bedpost in my mother's house. The guest room, left side of the headboard. Nolan stood. I'll pass this information to Detective Mendez. If it proves valuable, perhaps the prosecutor will consider it in your sentencing. As he turned to leave, Veronica called after him. Nolan, I am sorry, not for getting caught, but for becoming someone who could do this to another person. He paused at the door. Save the performance, Veronica. You weren't sorry during 5 years of deception. You weren't sorry when you discussed my murder over lunch. You're only sorry now because you failed. The information about the Brennan connection proved accurate. Within days, the FBI had incorporated the evidence from Gregory's safety deposit box into a larger RICO investigation against the crime family. Veronica's cooperation earned her no reduction in charges, but might influence her eventual sentencing. More importantly to Nolan, it provided the final piece in understanding the architecture of betrayal that had shaped the last 5 years of his life. Gregory hadn't just been a wealthy opportunist using his niece as a pawn. He'd been a money launderer for organized crime, making Nolan an unwitting adjacency to serious criminal operations. The knowledge crystallized his resolve. His campaign of retribution wasn't just justified. It was necessary, not just for his peace of mind, but to ensure that those who had conspired against him could never rebuild their lives to threaten him again. As the trial date approached, Nolan prepared to deliver the final blows in his methodically orchestrated revenge. The legal system would provide the framework, but Nolan would ensure the punishment extended far beyond whatever sentences the court imposed. Chapter 7. Ashes to Dust. The trial lasted 11 days. 11 days of evidence meticulously presented by the prosecution. 11 days of desperate countermeasures by the defense. 11 days of Nolan sitting stoically in the gallery, his expression never betraying the calculated satisfaction he felt watching Veronica, Dominic, and Gregory squirm under the weight of their exposed conspiracy. Sullivan Pierce, Veronica's high-priced attorney, attempted to paint her as another victim, manipulated by her uncle and coerced by Dominic. The strategy disintegrated when the prosecution played the basement recording where Veronica clearly instructed Dominic on how to ensure the gas leak would kill Nolan efficiently. On the final day, as the jury entered deliberations, Nolan met with Assistant District Attorney Frances Calloway in her office. The jury won't be out long, she predicted, organizing the trial materials into labeled boxes. The evidence is overwhelming. What are we looking at for sentencing? Nolan asked. Gregory's looking at 15 to 20 minimum for conspiracy to commit murder, plus the financial crimes and RICO charges. Dominic's prior record will push him toward the maximum, probably 25 years. She hesitated. Veronica's trickier. No prior record, and Pierce has built a somewhat convincing narrative of manipulation. Likely 10 to 15 years, with possibility of parole. After serving at least a third of her sentence, yes. Seeing Nolan's expression, she added, That's still a significant consequence, Mr. Voss. Many similar cases end with much lighter sentences. I understand the legal realities, he replied. I'm grateful for your thorough prosecution. After leaving the courthouse, Nolan drove to a secluded overlook where Wesley was waiting. They sat in silence, watching the sunset over the Boston skyline. Jury's deliberating, Nolan finally said. And you're not satisfied? Wesley observed. The legal system isn't designed for satisfaction. It's designed for procedure. Wesley studied his friend carefully. What are you planning, Nolan? Have you secured the documents I requested? With obvious reluctance, Wesley handed over a manila envelope. Everything's there, but I want it on record that I think this crosses a line. Noted. Nolan examined the contents, property records, financial statements, and contact information for several key individuals. What about the offshore arrangements? Set up as specified. Untraceable back to you. Good. And the Brennan situation? Wesley shifted uncomfortably. The FBI raid is scheduled for tomorrow morning, based on Gregory's evidence. Multiple locations simultaneously. If it goes as planned, most of their organization will be in custody by noon. And the information about Dominic's cooperation? Planted in the system yesterday. By now, it's reached the Brennan lieutenants still on the outside. Nolan nodded, satisfied. The pieces were aligning perfectly. One last thing. Did you speak with Pauline's mortgage holder? Yes. Once the trial concludes, They'll proceed with foreclosure regardless of any attempts to renegotiate. Thank you, Wesley. I know this isn't comfortable for you. You saved my business and my reputation when everyone else abandoned me, Wesley replied. I'll always have your back, Nolan. But this vendetta, it changes a person. Just make sure the man who comes out the other side is someone you can live with. The jury returned with their verdict the following morning. Guilty on all counts for all three defendants. As Nolan had predicted, Gregory received 18 years for conspiracy to commit murder plus additional time for the financial crimes. Dominic was sentenced to 22 years. Veronica received 12 years with possibility of parole after serving 4. While the courtroom emptied, Nolan remained seated, watching as the 3 people who had conspired to end his life were led away in handcuffs. Veronica looked back once, her expression unreadable. Nolan met her gaze steadily, allowing himself a single, slight nod. Acknowledgement, not forgiveness. Outside, reporters clamored for his statement. He delivered a carefully rehearsed response about gratitude for the justice system and his intention to move forward with his life. What he didn't mention was that his definition of moving forward included ensuring his betrayers had nothing to return to when if they ever regained their freedom. By that evening, the dominoes he'd arranged began to fall. News broke of the massive FBI operation against the Brennan crime family, with multiple arrests and seizures of property and assets. Buried in the coverage was a brief mention that authorities had been aided by information from Dominic Rafferty, currently beginning his prison sentence. Within the prison system, that information would be a death sentence. Dominic would spend his entire incarceration in protective custody, isolated, constantly watchful, never safe. The planted evidence wasn't even true, but it would accomplish Nolan's purpose regardless. For Gregory, the reckoning came in the form of financial annihilation. While he sat in his prison cell, the offshore companies holding much of his wealth experienced a series of security breaches. Accounts were emptied, transferred through a labyrinth of digital channels before eventually reaching environmental charities Gregory had actively fought against for years. Simultaneously, evidence of tax fraud appeared mysteriously in IRS databases, triggering automatic audits of all remaining Harding assets. By morning, federal liens will be placed on every property, business interest, and account bearing Gregory's name. As for Veronica, Nolan's approach was more personal. Using the legal authority granted to him as her husband before their divorce was finalized, he systematically unraveled her carefully constructed public image. Her social media accounts posted pre-scheduled confessions. Her email sent apology letters to friends and associates detailing her deceptions, and all her personal photos and videos were deleted from cloud storage, erasing her digital existence as thoroughly as she had attempted to erase his physical one. Additionally, he established a substantial trust fund for victims of attempted homicide, naming it after his mother. The foundation would provide support services, legal assistance, and transitional housing, all funded initially by the proceeds from selling the assets Veronica had hoped to claim after his death. The next morning, as Nolan prepared for a meeting with his company's board to discuss expansion plans, Detective Mendez called. "There's been an incident," she said, her voice professional but strained. "Dominic Rafferty was attacked in the prison yard this morning. He's in critical condition." "I thought he'd be in protective custody," Nolan replied, careful to keep his tone neutral. "He was scheduled for transfer. Someone leaked the transport details." She paused. "I'm calling because there are rumors about the attack being connected to information about him cooperating against the Brennans. Information that wasn't accurate, as I recall from our conversations." "That's right." Another pause. "These rumors, they appeared very suddenly in very specific channels." Nolan understood what she was really asking. "That's concerning. I hope the authorities find whoever was responsible for spreading misinformation." "Mr. Voss." "Nolan, I understand the desire for justice. More than most. But there are lines that, once crossed, change who we are. I appreciate your concern, Detective. Was there anything else?" The silence stretched for several seconds before she responded. "No, nothing else." As Nolan ended the call, he felt no triumph at the news of Dominic's attack, No satisfaction in Gregory's financial collapse. No pleasure in Veronica's social destruction. What he felt was the cool certainty that actions had consequences, that betrayal extracted its own unique price, and that he had been the instrument of that cosmic accounting. Chapter 8. Salt in the Earth. 6 months after the trial, Nolan's security firm had expanded to 3 additional cities. The government contract that Gregory and Veronica had coveted formed the foundation for a company now valued at over $70 million. Nolan had channeled his organizational skills and analytical mind into building something substantial from the ashes of his personal life. On the surface, he appeared to be moving forward admirably. He'd purchased a new home in a different neighborhood, established new routines, even begun casually dating again, though he maintained strict emotional boundaries that none of his companions had yet penetrated. Below that carefully constructed normalcy, however, Nolan continued monitoring the aftermath of his retribution with methodical precision. Weekly reports arrived in encrypted emails: Gregory's deteriorating health in prison, Veronica's failed appeal, Dominic's slow recovery from his injuries under constant guard, Pauline Harding's descent into financial ruin as the family wealth evaporated and creditors circled. Tara Lowell's struggle to find employment after her involvement in the conspiracy became public knowledge. He kept these updates in a secure digital folder labeled Closure, a reminder that justice was ongoing, not a single moment of verdict or sentencing. On a crisp autumn morning, Nolan met Theo for their now traditional Saturday breakfast. His brother had watched Nolan's transformation with increasing concern, but today he had news of his own. "I'm moving to Arizona," Theo announced after they'd ordered. Security contract with a tech company setting up facilities in Phoenix. 2-year minimum commitment. "That's a significant change," Nolan observed. "You've never mentioned interest in leaving Massachusetts." Theo studied him for a moment. "Sometimes distance provides perspective. I need that right now." "From what?" "From this." Theo gestured between them. "From watching my brother transform into someone I barely recognize. I'm the same person I've always been." No, the Nolan I knew understood the difference between justice and vengeance. He wouldn't have orchestrated Dominic Rafferty's prison yard accident. Nolan's expression remained neutral. "I had nothing to do with what happened to Rafferty. Maybe not directly, but we both know you created the circumstances." Theo leaned forward. "Gregory Harding's mysterious heart attack last month after his medication was accidentally switched? The foreclosure on Pauline's house despite her having made arrangements with the bank? The anonymous tips to Veronica's parole board every time she comes up for consideration? You seem very concerned about the welfare of people who conspired to murder me. I'm concerned about you. This obsession with monitoring their suffering, with ensuring it continues, it's consuming you. When does it end, Nolan? When are they punished enough?" The question hung between them as their food arrived. Nolan methodically arranged his silverware before responding. "I used to ask myself the same question, but I've realized something. There is no enough. No punishment equals 5 years of lies culminating in attempted murder. So it's not about achieving equivalence. It's about ensuring consequences are permanent. That's not justice. That's playing God. No, it's ensuring that actions have irreversible consequences, just like mine would have been if their plan had succeeded." Nolan's voice remained calm, reasonable. "I'm not actively harming them anymore, Theo. I'm simply ensuring they never recover what they lost." Theo pushed his plate away, appetite gone. "Do you hear yourself? You're talking about dedicating your life to making sure other people remain miserable. That's not healing. That's not moving forward. I've rebuilt my company. I've created new relationships. By any objective measure, I am moving forward. Externally, yes. But inside," Theo tapped his temple. "You're still living in that moment when you heard Veronica plotting your death. You haven't moved an inch from that day." The accusation struck closer to truth than Nolan wanted to admit. He changed tactics. "I appreciate your concern, but this is my life, my choice in how to process what happened. And that's why I'm leaving," Theo replied quietly. "I can't watch this version of you calcify into permanence." The brother I knew understood that holding on to hatred only poisons yourself. The brother you knew was naive enough to marry a woman who spent 5 years planning his murder. Theo stood, dropping cash on the table for his untouched meal. Call me when you're ready to actually heal, not just survive. I'll always be your brother, Nolan. But I can't be complicit in what you're becoming. After Theo left, Nolan sat alone, finishing his breakfast with the same methodical precision he applied to everything now. His brother's words echoed uncomfortably, challenging the narrative he'd constructed around his actions. Later that evening, he found himself parked outside the state correctional facility where Veronica was serving her sentence. He hadn't planned to come here, had actively avoided being anywhere near this place since the trial. Yet somehow, Theo's departure had triggered something unexpected, a need to confront the source of his transformation. He didn't go inside, didn't request a visit. Instead, he sat watching the imposing walls, trying to identify the emotion churning beneath his carefully maintained control. It wasn't satisfaction or vindication, not even anger anymore. It was something hollower, more persistent. His phone chimed with an incoming email, the weekly update on his betrayer's circumstances. Instead of opening it immediately as he usually did, he hesitated, Theo's words replaying in his mind. You're still living in that moment when you heard Veronica plotting your death. You haven't moved an inch from that day. With a deliberate movement, he moved the email to a folder without reading it. Then he started the car and drove away from the prison, with no destination in mind, but a growing certainty that something needed to change. Not his resolve regarding those who had betrayed him, that remained unaltered, but perhaps the space they occupied in his daily thoughts. The energy he dedicated to monitoring their suffering could be redirected toward something more constructive than mere surveillance of their downfall. As he drove through the night, Nolan began formulating a new approach, one that would cement his retribution while freeing him from the need to actively maintain it. A final reckoning that would allow him to truly move forward while ensuring they never could. Chapter 9. Salt the Earth. Winter descended on Boston with particular ferocity that year. 3 major snowstorms had paralyzed the city in December alone, creating a hushed landscape that mirrored Nolan's increasingly contemplative state. In the months since Theo's departure for Arizona, Nolan had methodically restructured his relationship with revenge. He'd stopped reading the weekly reports, instructing his investigators to continue monitoring, but to contact him only if something required his direct attention. He'd established automated systems to maintain the financial and legal pressures on the Harding family assets. And he'd finally filed for divorce, ending his legal connection to Veronica after nearly a year of deliberate delay. Today would mark the final phase of his recalibrated approach. As he buttoned his overcoat against the biting cold, Nolan reviewed his schedule for what he'd come to think of as his closure day. First stop, the attorney's office to sign the finalized divorce papers. Veronica had finally agreed to his terms, relinquishing all claims to any assets acquired during their marriage, accepting lifetime restraining orders, and acknowledging extensive financial penalties should she ever attempt to contact him or speak publicly about their relationship after her eventual release. She's getting nothing but her freedom when she's paroled, his attorney confirmed as Nolan signed the last document. And even that will be heavily restricted by these terms. Has she been notified of the finalization? The prison will deliver the paperwork today. His next appointment took him to the memorial garden he'd established in honor of other survivors of attempted homicide by intimate partners. The foundation he'd created now provided support services in 3 states, with plans to expand nationally. He walked the snow-covered paths, examining the simple stone monument at its center, inscribed with words that had become something of a personal mantra, from survival to revival. Midday found him at the headquarters of his security firm, where the board had gathered for a special announcement. Nolan stood before them, projecting the confidence that had become his trademark in business settings. Effective immediately, I'm stepping down as CEO, he announced, surprising everyone except Wesley, who had been briefed the previous evening. I'll maintain my position on the board, but will be transitioning to a new role as head of our nonprofit division, focusing on security solutions for vulnerable populations. The questions came rapidly. Why now? Who would replace him? Was this related to his personal trauma? Nolan addressed them with practiced calm, explaining that the company's successful expansion provided the perfect opportunity for new leadership while allowing him to channel his expertise into meaningful social impact. What he didn't share was the private recognition that had prompted this decision, that his obsession with monitoring his betrayer's suffering had begun to mirror their fixation on destroying him. That symmetry troubled him in ways he couldn't fully articulate but knew he needed to break. His final stop for the day brought him back to the state correctional facility, this time with purpose. He had arranged a supervised meeting with Veronica, their first since the brief encounter before the trial, over a year ago. She entered the visitation room with visible surprise. The prison environment had continued its transformation of her appearance. Thinner, paler, her once meticulous grooming simplified by institutional limitations. Yet she carried herself with the same poised calculation he recognized from their marriage. "I didn't expect to see you again," she said as she sat across from him. "Today seemed appropriate. The divorce is finalized." She nodded. "So I've been informed. You've stripped away everything." "Not everything. You still have your life, which is more than you planned to leave me. Is that why you're here? One final opportunity to underscore your victory." Nolan studied her, searching for any hint of genuine remorse. Finding none, he proceeded with his prepared statement. "I'm here to inform you personally that I've established certain permanent arrangements. First, I've created a trust that will systematically challenge any parole application you file. The trust has sufficient funding to continue this process for 50 years. Her expression tightened, vindictive to the end. "Second, I've transferred the majority of my assets to foundations and secured holding companies that can never be accessed by you or any Harding family member, regardless of legal maneuvering. What happened to Gregory's fortune will pale compared to the financial firewall I've constructed." "You've made your point, Nolan. You've won. This isn't about winning." He leaned forward slightly. "It's about ensuring that the consequences of your actions extend beyond whatever sentence the court imposed. You, Gregory, and Dominic attempted to take everything from me. You failed. Now you live with the reality that everything has been taken from you instead, permanently, irrevocably. And this gives you satisfaction?" Her voice carried a hint of the manipulative charm that had once clouded his judgment. "Satisfaction isn't relevant. This is simply completion." He stood, gathering his coat. "I won't be monitoring your situation anymore, Veronica. I won't be checking on your appeals or your prison conditions. I've established systems that will maintain these consequences automatically without requiring my attention or energy." "So you're finally moving on?" There was something almost like relief in her tone. "No." His voice was quiet but absolute. "I've already moved on. This is merely confirming that you never will." As he turned to leave, she called after him. "You know, you became exactly what Gregory said you would eventually reveal yourself to be: cold, calculating, ruthless. Maybe we weren't so different after all." Nolan paused at the door. "The difference is that I never would have conspired to murder someone for financial gain. Whatever I've become was forged in the fire you created." Outside, snow was falling again, softening the harsh lines of the prison complex. Nolan stood for a moment, breathing in the crisp winter air, feeling a subtle shift within himself. Not freedom from the past, but perhaps a recalibration of its weight. His phone rang. Theo, calling from Arizona. "I heard about the changes at the company," his brother said when Nolan answered. "Wesley mentioned you're moving into nonprofit work. It seemed time for a change in focus." "And the other situation? The monitoring, the reports?" Nolan watched the snowflakes swirling in the wind. "Ended. Not the consequences. Those remain permanent. But my active involvement in maintaining them." Theo was silent for a moment. "That's a start. It's more than that. It's a recognition that revenge can become its own prison. Coming from you, that's practically philosophical enlightenment," Theo said, a hint of their old connection warming his voice. "Don't mistake me," Nolan cautioned. "I haven't forgiven them. I never will. But I've established systems that ensure they face permanent consequences without requiring my ongoing attention. I'm reallocating my energy, not abandoning my principles." Still, Theo hesitated. Its movement in a healthier direction. As they continued talking, Nolan walked to his car, brushing snow from the windshield. In the distance, he could see the lights of Boston glimmering through the winter haze, the city where he'd built his life, lost it, and now was reconstructing something different in its place. What emerged from the ashes of betrayal wasn't the man he'd been before. That person had died the moment he heard Veronica plotting with Dominic. But neither was it the coldly obsessive avenger he'd temporarily become. This version of Nolan Voss carried the hard-earned wisdom that trust must be allocated as carefully as capital, that justice required active maintenance, and that moving forward didn't necessitate forgetting. He had salted the earth of his betrayers' futures, ensuring nothing would ever grow from the ruins of their conspiracy. Now, having secured that permanent desolation, he could turn his attention to cultivating his own new landscape, one built with the protective fortifications his experience had taught him were essential, but not defined solely by their presence. The snow continued falling as he drove away from the prison for the final time, leaving behind both Veronica and the version of himself that had existed primarily as a response to her betrayal. What lay ahead remained uncharted, but for the first time since that afternoon on his couch, pretending to nap while hearing his murder being planned, Nolan felt something approaching genuine curiosity about what his future might hold. Not forgiveness, never that, but perhaps, eventually, something resembling peace, built not on the foundation of forgetting, but on the certainty that justice, once established, would maintain itself without consuming the one who had secured it. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.